the first time the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch was printed was in the year 1814, 1814, in Tov Kuvay and Dalet, I believe. However, when it was published that time, not all the Simanim that were published later were there. So Siman Kuf Nun Hey and Kuf Nun Vav, Aruch Chaim were not printed in that printing, and it waited all the way till the year 1856, for the end of the Nesius of the Tzemach Tzedek, last 10 years, that there was another printing of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, and they wrote there that they found ksavim that they did not have previously, and they're including Siman Kuf Nun Hey and Kuf Nun Vav, and this was the first printing of those two simanim. And their bayit of the blibin ad etzam hayoim hazeh. So as we spoke about last class, the last few weeks, there was a new ksav that somehow survived from sometime in the 19th century, of these, not the whole simanim, but parts of these two simanim, Kuf Nun Hey and Kuf Nun Vav. And they looked there and they saw that there's shinuyim from the way they're printed. And last week we spoke about the fact that it was censored, meaning the matfisim in Zhutomer, when they printed it in 1856, they had the whole thing. But because of the censorship in Russia, they were not able to print all the details. And so they didn't. And last week we looked at one passage. What was the passage? The passage was whether Christianity is shituf, or better said, whether Umas Ha'olam are allowed to be Meshatev Shem Shemayim. That was a big subject, and we saw, and obviously it was taken out for Yidden to have that discussion in the Russian Empire in the 19th century. There was very strict censorship, and so that was that. Today we're going to continue and look at the other elements that were taken out from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, and as we will see, I'm going to argue, though there are some who disagree, and I'll tell you why they disagree soon, but all of these omissions are not accidents, they're all due to censorship. So let's get right into it. We're going to begin. The first thing is we're learning in text 1 is the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, the way it appears in print till very recently. So what does it say? It says in Kuf Nun Vav, Siv Gimel, it says as follows: Yinhoig v'derech hamitzua. We have this Jewish directive that generally speaking, when it comes to life, we should take the middle path. Too extreme in one way over the other way is not healthy. So in other words, between harchava and stinginess, you don't want to be that you spend money wildly. You don't want to be a crazy stingy. You want to go b'derech hamitzua. Hu derech hatayva v'yashara. Chutz. What is the exception? Shiflus haruach. The idea of bittul. The idea of not being a Baal Gaiva. Here you don't say you want to go in the middle. Here you don't say you want to go in the middle. Here you say you want to go all the way. Shema'ed ma'ed havei shval ruach. Because the lashon of the Mishnah is ma'ed ma'ed havei shval ruach. And what is the deal? Why does it say ma'ed ma'ed? So the Rambam learns. It's because regular midah, if you take the middle path, shval ruach is ma'ed ma'ed. You have to go all the way to the other extreme. Why? Ki to'evas Hashem kol gval lev. The pasuk says God hates arrogance. L'chein yisrachik mizeh ad ksei ha'acharein. Therefore, we should distance ourselves from it to the farthest extreme. If a person is experiencing arrogance, yeshes kilu koifer beikir. It's as if you're denying God. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, v'ram levavecha. You're going to feel high. You're going to feel special and good. V'shachachta es Hashem, and that's in Parsha Seikef in Perek Ches pasuk Yudalet. Continues Alter Rebbe, v'chol mi sheyesh biyadei gatzas haruach. If you have gatzas haruach, hu ka'asheira. You're like an asheira. Ve'ein ofar ninor b'tchias hameis. And your dirt is not going to shake by tchias hamesim. Wow, that's a scary line. In other words, such a person is not going to be zoicha for tchias hamesim. Okay, gaiva is a terrible thing. And the truth is, you can do a whole discussion about why gaiva is so terrible. And is the opposite of gaiva, if you're a shval ruach, does that mean you have a low self-esteem? And how is that healthy? Okay, all of that doesn't concern us today. What concerns us right now is these words, that if you have gatzas haruach, you're like an asheira. As far as I know, there's nowhere in Chazal where it ever tells someone that they're like a chayfetz of avodah zarah. That is a very, very bizarre lashon. To say that if you do something, you're like a chayfetz of avodah zarah. Sometimes we say it's kilu oived avodah zarah. It's like you're serving, it's like you're worshiping idols. But to say on someone that you're like the chayfetz of avodah zarah, it doesn't exist. In fact, let's go to the Gemara in Saita and see the makar of this din. The makar, the Alter Rebbe is not making this up. It's coming from the Gemara in Saita. Let's see what he says. Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Kol Adam sheyesh by Gasus Haruach. Any person who has Gasus Haruach, Ra'oi Ligadoi Ka'asheira. He should be uprooted like an Asheira. Ksiv Hacha, it says in Yeshayahu Perek Yud, V'ramei hakoyma geduim, and those who were very high are going to be cut down, which is a nevuah that the Navi is referring to, whatever he's referring to, but the way Chazal is darshaning it is referring to arrogance. Those who are going to be arrogant will be cut down, but don't say will be. It's worthy that they be cut down, but what's the verb that's used? Geduim, lashon, that type of arapakin. Uksiv hacha, says in Dvarim, v'ashereim tigadeon, and you shall uproot the Asherah trees. So therefore, the Gemara is making a, so to speak, Gzeira Shava between these two psukim, and they're saying that just like an Asherah needs to be uprooted, a Gas Ruach, someone who's arrogant, needs to be uprooted. B'pashas it means he doesn't deserve to live. He needs to be uprooted from the source. Just like that Asherah tree doesn't deserve to live, should be separated from the ground, so too this person should be ripped away from his source of life. Okay, that's different from what the Alter Rebbe has. Alter Rebbe has that if you're a Gas Ruach, you are an Asherah, which, as I said, is a very bizarre thing. And we see the Gemara says that it's Roi Ligadoi Ka Asherah. Okay, now let's go to the Ksav Yad that was found. Go to text 3. Second paragraph. The first paragraph, there's a few minor differences. For example, if you compare text 1 and text 3, the third word, we, in our Shulchan Aruch, it says hamitzua, there it's b'derech hamemutza. So more minor differences that don't really need to concern us. But go to the second paragraph of number 3. Look what it says here. V'chol mi sheyesh biyodei gatzes haruach. This is this Ksav Yad of Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, roi legodoi ka'asheira ve'ein ofar ninor b'tchias hamesim. So the argument is, indeed, the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch in the original said, like the Gemara said, that it is Roy Lagodei Ka'asheira, and there are no sources that say Ka'asheira. How do I know? I'm not Baki B'Chala Torah Kula, but it's easy to put word searches today into search engines to see. Does any sefer say who Ka'asheira? No, it's only the Alter Rebbe. It's only in the print, and it was removed. Now the question is, why was it removed? So some people will say, there are people who want to say, it's just a mistake. It's a mistake. Mistake happens. Okay, I don't think it's to lose a word. Godoi, Roy, what do we have here? Roy Lagodoi, Tohu, that's not a mistake. That's not a mistake. There are certain mistakes, like Memutza could turn into Mitzua. These types of mistakes happen, but this is not a mistake. Nevertheless, we have to expand our understanding of what censorship was about during 19th century Russia. Obviously, it's when you say, talking about Avodah Zarah for Christians, I was like, oh yeah, censorship. But like this, saying that a Gas Ruach, Roi Lagodei Ka'asheira. Okay, what's wrong? Why would the Goyish censor here if you say that someone who's arrogant deserves to be uprooted like an Asherah? Okay, I'll make an argument soon. We'll come back to that soon. Let's go to the next one. Beis. Beis was another thing. In order to appreciate this Keta of the Shulchan Aruch, we'll learn a Keta and Gemara and Yuma, and then we'll see how the Alter Rebbe has a change from the Gemara. The Gemara says as follows. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Shimon ben Yoed Tzadok. Rabbi Yochanan said, Kol Talmid Chacham she'eino noikem v'noiter kenachash. A Talmid Chacham who doesn't take nekama of the people who harm him, like a snake. Okay, a snake is the symbolism of a venomous and a mean animal. Ain't a Talmid Chacham, you're not a valid Talmid Chacham stands up for his honor, and he's going to have nekama. He's going to take nekama, and Nepira means he's going to hold a grudge. What does this mean? The Torah says b'feidish, you're not allowed to have nekama. You're not allowed to do netira. And for the Gemara, hahu b'momen hu diksid. That's talking about a case of moment, and what I took out from the text is the famous passage that we know, we see it in Rashi. What is nekama and netira? So when the person comes and says, can I borrow your axe? And then he says no, and then you do it back to him and you say, I'm not going to lend you my axe, that's nekama. That's a davar sheba moment. In other words, a Talmid Chacham, if he goes to borrow an axe, and the guy says, I'm not lending you my axe, the Talmid Chacham should not have nekama. Davar sheba moment, he's not allowed to have nekama, the Gemara is saying. If, however, it's not a davar sheba moment, what is it? But someone punched Chatz V'Shalom, a Talmid Chacham, calls him Sar Haguf, or maybe even abused him and mocked him and yelled at him in public, that's not a davar sheba moment. There, the Talmid Chacham has to stand up for kavod HaTorah and has to have nekama and have to have netira. So that if it's about borrowing a davar sheba moment, loy sikoim veloy sitar. But other than if he attacks the Talmud Chacham's his person, then he has to stand up for kavod HaTorah and he has to have nekama interior. This is where the Gemara is holding now. Fragt the Gemara, really? It's out of the gufa loy. In a case where he causes pain to the Talmud Chacham, loy sikoim and loy sitar doesn't apply. Not true. Tanya, we have a brisa that says, if you're a person who gets ashamed and you don't shame others, you hear abuse and you don't respond, and you serve God out of love, and although they're suffering, you're still happy about it because you know it's coming from the Eibishter. The pasuk says in Shulchan about these people, the lovers of God, are going to be as strong as the sun is when it comes up in the morning. So in other words, what do you see from this brisa? There's an Indian in hearing abuse and not responding. So how could you say that it's only for a davar sheba moment? But if it's an attack on your body or if it's an attack on your reputation, there you should have nekama. Here you see, you're not supposed to respond. What's the answer? And for the Gemara, la'olam denakit le'belibe. It's true, you're not supposed to respond. You're right, we have to fine tune what we're saying. You're not supposed to respond. But you have to hold a grudge in your heart. Why? Not because of you, chas v'shalom, not because of you, your personality. Pashut, because of kavod HaTorah, someone mocked you, you have to hold a grudge in the heart. Wow. Okay, amazing thing we're learning here. What do you mean? We have another teaching that says that if you bypass your emotions, in other words, and you forgive, even though you don't want to forgive, then the Eibishter is going to be mechaper all that. It's midah kaneged midah. You worked really hard to override your feelings of hate, so the Eibishter will override his feelings where he wants to take punishment on you. So l'chayra, how could it be that we're saying the Talmud Chacham is holding on to a grudge in his heart? And for the Gemara, the mafayis mafayis. Rebbe is talking about when you were appeased. So if you come to the Talmud Chacham, he says, sorry, I know I yelled at you and I know I punched you, but please, please, please forgive me, and I didn't mean it, and I was drunk, or whatever it is, divrei piyus, that's fine, no problem. Then this is the sugya that we have here in the Gemara. Okay? Now the Alter Rebbe in Siman Kuf Vav summarizes this in the Gemara. As we're reading the Alter Rebbe's summary in Kuf Vav, this is the way we have it in our Tfus today, you'll notice a significant change from the Gemara. Says Alter Rebbe, he starts off saying, anger is no good, and therefore we want to avoid anger. Next paragraph. If we're dealing with the Talmud Chacham, and someone mocked him, someone shamed him, he should not respond. He should not respond. Right? We learned in the Gemara. What do we learn there? You're not supposed to respond. But what do we say there? We said, but you're supposed to have something in your heart, right? There will be a punishment for the abuser, for shaming Torah, the Talmud Chacham and Torah. So, and if someone else comes along to defend the rabbi, to the Talmud Chacham's honor, the Talmud Chacham should be quiet, and shouldn't tell the guy to stop. And that's why they said, what does it mean that you have to bear a grudge? What does it mean that you have to have revenge? It means it in this sense, that if someone else comes along, you're not going to be moicha if that person wants to take revenge. Okay, then the Sif continues. What's the bottom line? There was one key from the Gemara that's missing from this Alter Rebbe. What was the key? The Gemara had said that you don't respond, but you hold onto a grudge in your heart. You look at this Alter Rebbe, the way we have it, that detail's missing. It doesn't say that you're holding onto a grudge. All it says is, to the offender, to the bad boy who did the attack, the Alter Rebbe does not say here, you, as the Talmud Chacham, should hold on to the grudge in your heart. Okay, now look at number 6. This is the Ksav Yad that was just discovered. And here are the relevant lines. Vin Talmud Chacham. If it's a Talmud Chacham, the word who, the im hu Talmud Chacham, the word who is missing there. Okay. Im Talmud Chacham. There are minor differences again, but we don't have to focus on that. And someone attacks you, you don't respond. You should hold on to a grudge in your heart on the fact of bizayin HaTorah. In other words, the words, this also, This is not a mistake. This is not an accident. This didn't happen as a typo or a copyist. This is intentional. It used to say, Mekom HaKohen, Yi Eloi Oynish, Loi going on the attacker is going to have a Oynish Abizayin HaTorah, which removed what the Gemara had said. And here we see the original that you had in the Gemara. Mekom HaKohen, Yatir Loi Eva Beliboy Abizayin HaTorah. You should have, which is what the... Remember, what are we talking about? We're not talking about what type of Oynish an attacker is going to get. That's not what Siman Kuf Nun Vav is B'chlal talking about. You get an Oynish for attacking someone? That's not the subject of the conversation. The subject of the conversation is, should I be angry? That's the Kuf Nun Vav. It's about midos. Should I be angry? This makes more sense. Should you be angry? Well, not in the degree that you're responding, and yes, to the degree where you're having it in your heart. This version makes sense, what we have here. In the Gemara, the original print, number one, doesn't reflect the Gemara, and number two, doesn't reflect the theme, talking about an oynish that person is going to have. Okay. Here again, some people today are looking at this. They notice there's a change, but they're having a hard time understanding why would there be a change. Because it doesn't sound like you're talking about Christianity over here. What's offensive to non-Jews? Okay. So this is where I think, this is an example of where knowing history is an important element in trying to figure these things out. The big Shulchan Aruch was printed in Vilna. I don't have the exact year. Sometime in the 1860s, 1870s. Look on the right side, where it says Hilchos Nida V'Cherem. It's Siman Shimon Lamed Dalid in Yeridea. Look what it says. Look at the title of the Siman. Heach Hayu Noyagin Im HaMenuda. How they used to deal with the person who was excommunicated. Oy HaMuchram. Two different forms of excommunication. Va'ama Menadin. And why we excommunicate. V'din HaTarasai. And how to release one from excommunication. You notice there's one of the basic rules of writing has been violated in this sentence, where there isn't agreement between the first clause of the sentence and the second one. The first clause says, Hey achayu noyagin. Well, how was it in the past? And then it should have said, ve almeh hayu menadin, right? But it has that in the present tense. That's question number one. And the answer to that question is that this is not the way Siman Shimon Lamed Dalid appeared in the prior printings of the Shulchan Aruch in the 1500s and in the 1600s and in the 1700s and ad hayoy, today. It said, Heach noyagin im hamenuda. How do we deal with it? Present tense. Shulchan Aruch is not here to tell you about laws that happened b'zman habayis. In fact, that's the difference between the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam. The Rambam tells you everything. Shulchan Aruch only gives you what's relevant today. It never said, Heach hayu noyagin. This was added in because there was a problem for them to write in Vilna in the 1860s or 70s, for them to write that excommunication is something that happens today was a problem. And so therefore they had to sneak in that word, hey achayu, and that was enough. Which would also explain why they didn't put it in at the second half of the sentence. They didn't bother doing it. If the censor was happy with this, then they sufficed with this. And then on the bottom of this siman, you notice right in where it says Hilchos Nida V'Cherem, there's a star. And it says on the bottom of the Shulchan Aruch, like this, Kol hadinim shebesinim zeh, all of the dinim about excommunication, eino noyegin ke'ez, we don't do them today. V'nesru al pi chachmei ha'Torah bizmanenu, and the rabbis have said we're not allowed to do it, mikoyach dina de malchusa, because of dina de malchusa. Okay. So we're starting to get a picture over here. There's a dina de malchusa that's saying that you're not allowed to do a nidoy and a cherem, and once you understand that, all the pieces are going to come together. Let me show you one more example of this. On the left side is an image of the printing of the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan was written by a big posek in the end of the 19th century in Europe, whose name was Rabbi Michael Epstein. And he wrote on all the Simanim, on Siman Shimon Lamed Dalid, he writes like this. Here's his title. This is printed in the 1890s. Okay? 1890s. Dine nidoy umuchram bizman hakadmoy. Okay? The way it used to happen. Then look, before Sif Aleph, he has an entire paragraph here. This is what he says. I'm paraphrasing in English. Dina de malchusa dina. This is a big principle. And by the law of the king, the czar, it is forbidden to put an excommunication of any sort on a fellow Jew. And this is true in all of the governments in Europe. Just in some of the Islamic lands, like in the Ottoman Empire and in Persia and in Morocco, there, according to the secular law, it is okay for them to place an excommunication on a Jew. And therefore, all of the dinim that we're going to be explaining over here, this is only for those Arabic countries, but in this country over here, God forbid to excommunicate. And then he says a line that I'm not sure I fully understand to conclude that paragraph. Okay, so here you see, again, this idea, excommunication is off the table. It's interesting, this actually, what's the story here? The story over here goes like this. In Europe, you used to have something that was called the Vad Arba Aratzos. The Vad Arba Aratzos worked like this. You had a self-governing body that ruled over the Jewish people that lived in the Arba Aratzos of Ukraine, different regions, where there was one was Vilna, Lithuania, Lita was one of them, and Poland, divided into 4 different regions, and each one, they had their Parnosim, that were the Balabatim and the Rabbanim, and they basically ruled over. It was an autonomous Jewish community within Poland. They had major powers. The government tax went through them. So in other words, they told the Vad Arba Aratzos how much money they needed to deliver each year. The Vad Arba Aratzos would go to you and they would decide how much you're paying, when you're paying, how you're going to pay, and if you don't pay, how you're going to get punished. Amazing coercive powers that they had at that time. And as part of those coercive powers, one of the things was the cherem and the nidui and excommunicating someone, which had a real power, because if you're excommunicated, that was like the government excommunicating you, and obviously that comes along with serious consequences. It wasn't a joke. The poil, in this climate, the killers used to make takonis. You're not allowed to wear this, you're not allowed to go like this, and if you violated those takonis, you also get punished. Then came along toward the end of the 1700s. First, the Polish government started saying, we don't like this arrangement anymore. What is this business? We have a government, a state within a state? That makes no sense. Have it normal, what we consider normal today. So they started removing the power of the Rabbanim, of the Vad Arba Aratzos. And then came the 1770s, I don't remember the exact year, and what was left of Poland was divided up between 1770s.
Started with the war, whatever.
And the Russia came and they took half of Poland, and the Austrians came and they took the other half, and basically Poland ceased to exist, and the Vad Arba Aratzos ceased to exist. Before that, there were no Jews that lived in Russia. No, you didn't live. You're not allowed to live in Russia. But then they conquered Poland. They conquered all the Yidden with them, and that's when they started the Pale of settlements with all the Tzaris that the Yidden had in Russia. Started then. But one of the big changes was Vad Arba Aratzos. No. Power to Rabbanim was absolutely not, and they were very concerned. Anything that sounded like rabbinic police powers, they would go crazy over this type of thing. When the Rizhiner was arrested by the Russian Tsar. Why? Because there was a chashash over there that some police powers happened in the community where they knocked someone off that they didn't want. The Russians were very, very particular and careful about this, which is why in the Shulchan Aruch to talk about a nidui and a cherem was you're not allowed to do it. You can talk about it as history, but you can't talk about it as current events. So they put this in, but it was wink, wink. Everyone knew exactly what was happening over here. Interestingly, the Alter Rebbe referenced this during his arrest. What happened was, during the Alter Rebbe's arrest, now we have the documents where the Alter Rebbe wrote answers in Hebrew that were translated into Russian, so they found, I don't remember if they found the Hebrew or if they found the Russian, but they have the documents that was printed in the early 1990s. These were discovered and they were printed. So one of the things they have the Alter Rebbe explaining to the Russians, what happened over here with Avodas HaTfilah? Why all of a sudden Chassidim are making a big koch on Avodas HaTfilah? So the Alter Rebbe explains, he says that what happened was, a few years ago, he doesn't give exact dates, but it's like a few decades ago, and for a long time, you had people who were anti-davening. Rabbanim, he says, who were anti-davening. And he explains. So you always had daveners. But what happened is, in Poland, you had rabbis who were big Talmid Chachamim, and they weren't Ovdei Hashem, and they didn't like it, and they laughed at it, and this wasn't them. And they had coercive powers, he says. They had coercive power. So they made, like, you're not allowed to daven. This is what Alter Rebbe said. They made that you're not allowed to daven. And so Chassidim was a reaction, the emphasis on Avodah Fatzila was a reaction to this thing. And when Alter Rebbe is describing it, he's like, yeah, remember when the rabbis used to have coercive power, so they're able to use it in this terrible way that people shouldn't daven. Then he's like, but then, toward the end, Alter Rebbe wrote, here's the number 9. If you look at number 9, he says, until God's kindness came, and Russia came to take over Poland, okay? So the Heyeres Ruach Malchus HaKesaris Russia, Limsha will spasha b'chol Poland. So that was a good thing that Russia here took over Poland. This is what Alter Rebbe is writing there. And before, the last Polish king, already then, you see that language? The rulership of the rabbis went down. When they divided it up, and then he goes, and so then they during that time, Alter Rebbe also goes on to say that this was during a period when the rabbis would buy the office, and they bought the office. It came along with coercive powers, and now Baruch Hashem, that whole thing was nisbatal. Now everyone could go back to daven. So this is a very interesting allusion to this concept of the police powers that rabbis used to have, which was part of the Vada Ba'aratzis. And once you understand this, it all comes together. Why? Because you could see, you have to remember, censors, not every censor is the same. Everyone has their own thing that they're sensitive to. But you could definitely see that a censor would see, Rabbi, you're a Talmid Chacham, you're the rabbi. You're going to hold nitira in your heart, hate in your heart toward the person who offended you. That sounds close like a nidui. That's leading to excommunication. No. That can't be. We can't even talk that you're holding any grudge in your heart to them. It's just too dangerously close to that conversation of rabbis saying, I'm going to do this to you, or I'm going to do that to you. So therefore out. Since they took that out. And even Roy Legodek Hashera, which could sound like a punishment that is going to be done by a Jewish court. Not that that's what it meant. It never meant that. It didn't mean it in the Gemara. But that it could chas v'shalom be construed to mean that we should do something to him, which again, they're fighting against. A chedem you can't do. A nida you can't do. A lachas kam v'kam, a corporal punishment. A lachas kam v'kam, anything worse than that. So therefore that language is also something that they were very, very sensitive to, and outside they took this out. This is the pashtus, what happened. It's what makes the most sense to me. Okay. Now, there's more. There's more b'negei asif about Avas Yisrael. So let's read how the Alter Rebbe exists by us today in Kuf Nun Vav about Avas Yisrael. This is what the Alter Rebbe says. Sif Hey, mitzvah kol adam lev es kol echad ve'echad kigufay. A person has to love every single person like himself. Shanamar v'afta l'recha kamoicha. The pasuk says v'afta l'recha kamoicha. Lefichach. Okay, we don't have to go so much weiter here. Vav k'sheyachta ish leish, and if someone sins, lo yistemenu v'yishtak, don't hold it in. You have to tell the person. Okay, where's this Alter Rebbe coming from? It's coming from the Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham writes these dinim in Siman Kuf Vav. The Alter Rebbe is basing himself on the Magen Avraham. Let's compare the Alter Rebbe that we have to the Magen Avraham. Look at number 11. Mitzvah al kol adam le'oiv as kol echad mi Yisrael kegufay. You already notice a major difference between the way the Alter Rebbe exists by us and the Magen Avraham. Alter Rebbe said, le'oiv as kol echad ve'echad, love everyone. Magen Avraham wrote, le'oiv as kol echad mi Yisrael, every Jew. That's not an accident. Then the Magen Avraham goes weiter. Second line. When we say reyacha, what does it mean you shall love your friend? Your friend means someone who is a frume yid in Torah mitzvahs. But if it's a person who's wicked, it's a person who's doing averis, and he's reprimanded, and he doesn't care, here, mitzvah lisnoisoi. Here there's a mitzvah tatum. And in fact, from the Lashon Aval sounds like Aval, I told you now there's a mitzvah of Avas Yisrael. But you should know that the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael doesn't apply to this person. Here, not only the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael doesn't apply, there's a mitzvah l'snoisai. Where is it, says Magen Avraham? This is an Arvei Psachim, Daf Kuf Yud Gimel, and that's per an interpretation of Hagoy's Maimonides. I mean, Hagoy's Maimonides, one of the Rishonim, already pointed out that the Gemara in Arvei Psachim teaches us that. Umashma Sham b'Taisus. And if you look at Tosfos and Arvei Psachim, it sounds like Tafilu Hachi Mitzvah Litainimai. Although you need to hate him, still you should help him out with his animal.
Why? Kedei lakuf yitzroi. In order to break your own yetzer hara, so you shouldn't hate him. In other words, it sounds that, yes, the Rasha you need to hate, but at the same time, you should go help him out with his animal. What's the background here? The Torah has a pasuk where it says, when you see the chamor of your enemy that is struggling under its burden, help out. So the Gemara in Arvei Psachim asks, enemy? How? How enemy? You now have an enemy. Oh, so the Gemara says, no, the enemy is because he's not re'acha b'Torah of mitzvahs. So therefore it could be an enemy. Oh, so what do you see? And afal b'kein, also tasevimai. Why? Because you don't want to hate him sina gemura. A shtickle sina, not sina gemura. And so this is the way to force yourself not to come to too much hate. And the Magen Avraham is bringing that. And then he goes on, the Alter Rebbe had that. But the Alter Rebbe did not have this entire passage about hating. Gone. Now it would be very easy to do what? To say, yeah, because why? Because Alter Rebbe is chassidus and love and perek lamed beis, right? And you don't have it. Okay. Weiter in the Magen Avraham, avas hager shenis gayer, loving a ger who converted, beis mitzvahs hasehem, 2 mitzvahs haseh. Shenemar v'haftem es hager, because it says you shall love the ger, and he's a Jew, so you have you have 2 mitzvahs. This passage also not in the Alter Rebbe. This passage is not in the Alter Rebbe. Okay. Now, if you look elsewhere, the Alter Rebbe does say this. The Alter Rebbe in Cheshen Mishpat has the whole din about hating another person. He says, look at the din. What does the Torah mean when it sees when you see the donkey of your enemy? It's not talking about a non-Jew. It's talking about you hate a Jew. How can you hate a Jew? You're not allowed to hate. Amr Chacham is very simple. You saw him doing an avera. You warned him. And still he did it anyway. You can't go to Bezdin for him to get a punishment. Why? Because you're only one. So they're anyway not going to believe you. So it's not like you could go to the Bezdin. So this is what are you supposed to do? So you have no choice. You have to hate him. Mitzvah listen, until he does tshuva. But still before the tshuva, mitzvah, lifrek, v'litanim, the Torah is telling you need to help him out. Okay, so your basic Torah is, the Alter Rebbe is telling you in Choshen Mishpat what he didn't tell you in Kufran Vav, which is what the Magen Avraham said, that there is a Jew who, Avos Yisrael, no, Sinna, yeah, and Afal B'Kain, with the Sinna, not a Sinna Gemara, and Ad Kedei Kach, you need to help this person out. Okay. Now, what do we have in the Shulchan Aruch in this Ksav Yad? In 2440, you have like this. Look at Sifhei. Mitzvah, I'll call Adam Lev, it's called Echad Vechad, Mi Yisrael. So it has Mi Yisrael, exactly the way the Magen Avraham had it. I put the word there in bold so that we can notice. Okay, next paragraph. You have a new paragraph there. He does not count as Reyacha. For other inyanim in Torah mitzvahs, he's Reyacha. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. But for Ava, believe, Eina Nikra Reyacha, Ella, Kishu Reyacha, B'Torah mitzvahs. Unless he's Reyacha B'Torah mitzvahs, his mom is like the Magen Avraham, and his mom is like what he said in Cheshen Mishpat. But if you're dealing here with a wicked person who doesn't accept Teichacha, mitzvah l'snasai, you should hate him. Shenemar, Yiras Hashem, Sinei Sarah. I'm not sure what the exact nikud of that pasuk is, but if you fear God, you're going to hate evil, and part of that is to hate Rishoy. Avo, even though we're hating him, you have to help him out, you have to give him life. And you have to be careful about his property. Just like every other Jew. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, that you see the donkey of your enemy, and this is what we're talking about, is still you have to help him out. So hate, but help. Hate, but help. Interesting. Hate, but help. Elohim came. If he doesn't avera because he wants to get the Jewish community mad, or he threw the whole thing away, here dinoi kenachri. He can't. Here he's mamish like a goy, and the din doesn't apply whatsoever. So in other words, what was missing from the Alter Rebbe about hating, you have it in this censored Shulchan Aruch. So why would this have been censored? Why would this come out? This would come out because the Russian government's policy was they wanted Jews to convert. In fact, there's a famous statement that was made after they got all the Jews that they didn't want. What's the long-term plan? So they said, divide a third to emigrate, a a third to annihilate, and a third to convert. That was their goal. And they used the Haskalah movement when that worked, which was a goal for assimilation. So it was a very big nekuda for them to get people to assimilate and to do Averis and to disconnect themselves from the Jewish community. And then who were the censors themselves? Forget the Russian government. The censors themselves were such mumarim. So obviously they wouldn't allow such a passage that says you're going to hate such people. They wouldn't allow this, and this is why this came out. Then the Alter Rebbe goes weiter in this Ksav Yad. The Avas Hager, and if you have the mitzvah to love a ger, Shabbat v'nichnas me'eretz merchak, who comes from a faraway place, and he comes tachat kanfei Ashchina to join the Jewish people, who beis mitzvahs hasei, two mitzvahs. Achas mipnei shu b'chlal re'acha, one because he's a Jew, achas mipnei shu a ger, and the Torah Omer v'hafta mitzaker. Why is this out? Why is this come out? Go to the left. Go to the left. You see it says section Hey, Kabbalah's Gedim. Look at the Aruch HaShulchan in Kuf Nun Vav. Also, Avas Hager biyamim hakadmoinim shabav v'nichnas tachas kanfei Ashchina shtei mitzvahs. Same thing. We don't do biyamim hakadmoinim in the olden days with Gedim. Not us. No, Chas v'Shalom. We don't do Gedim. Biyamim hakadmoinim. Look at the Tzemach Tzedek in Biyurei HaZoyar, number 16. This was pointed out by Reb Shaga Hamnek Shlita. So, the Tzemach Tzedek says as follows. Lo golu Yisrael ala kadei lo hisav alein Gedim. The Gemara in Pesachim says, Yidden went to Golus for the purpose of Gedim. Fragt sich the Shaila lo chayre, and a moving fragt the Tzemach Tzedek, she'im kain, hoyo ha-Gedim harbe moed b'Yisrael. If the whole purpose is to get Gedim, so it's a bad business deal. Because how many Gedim did we get? You would have to imagine that there's a lot of Gedim. But harei adarabba, onu royin sh'a-Gedim en miyuta d'miyuta, there's very few Gedim. Then the Tzemach Tzedek goes weiter. And that's even when there was a government that allowed us to take Gedim. We're not allowed to take a ger. In Russia, you are not allowed to convert a non-Jew to a Jew, a Christian to a Jew was not allowed to convert. It wasn't only in Russia that way, it was other countries like this. And so therefore, to talk about Avas Hager, you weren't able to talk about Avas Hager. So the Aruch HaShulchan had to say that was B'yam HaKadmoinim. And the whole passage got taken out of the Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe. Even though, here's the amazing thing, it's 2 layers of censorship. Why? Because look back at the Alter Rebbe. Look what the Alter Rebbe says about the Ger. V'Avas Hager, Sheba v'nichnas me'eretz merchak. Sheba v'nichnas me'eretz merchak. The Magen Avraham didn't have those words. The Magen Avraham just said, V'Avas Hager. V'Avas Hager, right? Avas Hager shenis gar beis mitzvahs haseh. Shabbat v'nichnas merchak, those words don't appear anywhere in Jewish, they don't appear. It's not a real word. So what happened here? Either the Alter Rebbe himself wrote it, and there's 2 different types of censorship. Really, there's many different types of censorship. Sometimes when the Goyim come and they say you need to take something out. Sometimes it's a Yid who says it. And sometimes it's self-censorship. What's self-censorship? That you lechatchila know, let me write the text in such a way that it's going to be fine. There's a Rishima of the Rebbe, also pointed out by Reb Shraga Hamnik, that the Tzemach Tzedek and the Mittel Rebbe were so afraid of the Russian government that they would write their ksavim, not that they printed, that they would just write. They wouldn't write, they would write Edom and they'd use code words. Okay? So that's called self-censorship. It's not that you have a manuscript and then when you print it, you change it. This is self-censorship, lechatchila, the way you write it. So it could be the Alter Rebbe, lechatchila, the way he wrote it, because of the limitation, wanted to do what the Aruch HaShulchan did 100 years later. And that is, he wrote, the Avas Hager, what ger? You're not allowed to have a ger. He came from the Ottoman Empire. That the Russians didn't mind. Shabbat Meretz Merchak. Okay, if he converted from Islam, that's fine. Shabbat Meretz Merchak. He converted over there where it's legal to do conversions. Either the Alter Rebbe did it himself, or maybe it wasn't the Alter Rebbe, but it was an earlier, someone else in between that censored the text, but Abba Bekain, it wasn't good enough, and when they printed this Siman in Shulchan Aruch for the first time in the 1840s, the whole thing came out, despite the Shabbat Me'eretz Merchak. But so you have here 2 layers of censorship, which is very easy. There is someone who wanted to argue that the Alter Rebbe was being mechadash din here, that the chiyuv of Avas Hager is only if he comes from a faraway place. But if it's local, then there's no. I think that's a terrible error. I think it's a terrible mistake. There's a very famous story about the Ger Avram ben Avram, Graf Potocki. The story, every Jew in the 1800s knew this story in Eastern Europe. Every Jew.
They only one.
Okay. What was the story? There was a Polish nobleman. You have to look in terms of the sources of what exactly happened. I can't tell you. I can only tell you the Messiah, the way it was reported. He was a Polish nobleman, and he fell in love with Judaism. He converted. I think he ran away to a different country, which was the Seder. Converts happen, but the way it would work is you would go to a faraway place. No one knows who you are, and you start anew. That was the Seder. How Gadim used to do this thing. So then he came back, and he lived in it, and some people found out. And after there was a Yiddish boy that got into a fight with him, and he said, "I'm going to master on you," and he went, and he mastered, and they took him, and they said, "You have to recant." He said, "I'm not recanting," and so he was burnt at the stake in Vilna during the times of the Gra. So Maisa, the Gra, he spoke to him, and what the Gra told him. Everyone grew up with this story. Everyone knew you don't talk a ger, you don't do gators. This was a big deal. They knew this is fire. So not surprising if that these two layers of censorship and Gerus would have happened. Sometimes we take for granted the things, what religious liberty means. It's a major matana. Right? Maybe you want to say it's better when you have Rabbanim who have police powers. Aveda b'keach atzmei is what we need to have in this generation. Malchus v'ratzon kibla aleim, not when we're being forced. Okay, now like this. So we have here, back to Avos Yisrael, we have here a passage of Alter Rebbe telling us about hate, that hate is on the table. And before this, Oira Chaim didn't have hate on the table. Choshe Mishpat had hate on the table. And Perek Lamed Beis Tanya also had hate on the table. But Oira Chaim, there was no hate on the table. So it reminded me of a Sikha of the Rebbe, that although the Sif was removed from censorship, and I mentioned here in Shul a few weeks ago, but now you have the ability to see it inside. It's put in Tafshin Yud Beis, and there's audio of the Fabrengen, so if you're interested, you can listen to the audio. The Rebbe was talking about a different siman. Let's start from the beginning. The Rebbe was speaking about the Friedrich Rebbe in Vienna. Friedrich Rebbe was in Vienna. The Orthodox Kehillah, members of the Orthodox Kehillah came to him with tinus, and they said, "Why are you being friendly with people who are apikursim?" And in fact, the Shulchan Aruch paskins a din of moiridin v'loi mailin. What does that mean? Moiridin means that if you have the ability to push them into a pit and you get away with it, go ahead. And the loy mailin is, and if they're down there and they're saying help, 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 and you have the ability to just pass without schlepping them out, you do it. And there's two different chilukim. Some people, there's not moiridin, loy moiridin, you're not allowed to push them. But if they're already there, loy mailin. Some people, if they're even worse, they're not only moiridin, but also, not only ain't a mailin, but also moiridin. This is in one of the last simanim in Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat. You could understand, based on everything that I've said so far, that siman is a problematic siman. We'll get there in a second. So they came to the Friedrich Rebbe. How you talk? So the Friedrich Rebbe responded and said that siman is one of the last simanim in the Shulchan Aruch. The Rebbe said once, when he repeated, the Rebbe said the story a few times. One of the times the Rebbe said, he didn't say what siman. The reason is, because although most part the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch go on lockstep with each other, Siman Chaf Hey in Torah is the same Siman Chaf Hey in Shulchan Aruch. This Siman, there's a discrepancy how it's in the Torah, how it's in the Shulchan Aruch. One, it's 3 from the end, one is 2 from the end, the Gedenknish, so therefore the Lashon of the Friedrich Rebbe was, it's of the last Simanim in Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat. So, and there's a lot of material till you get there. There's Eira Chaim, and there's Yeredeya, and there's Even Ezer and Choshen Mishpat. First, we'll learn and make sure we're careful about observing the first 4 halakim. And after we finish that, then we'll sit down and have a discussion about whether the din of Mailin and Moiridin applies to the people that you're saying it applies to. This is what the Friedrich Rebbe told. So, the Rebbe the Rebbe spoke about this, and the Rebbe said that, a Yid reads from right to left. So in other words, if you start Shulchan Aruch on the left side, you're seeing the words, but you can have a warped understanding of how to apply it. And the Rebbe basically says that it's an Inyan and Torah to learn, but it's chas v'shalom to practice such a thing. Chas v'shalom to practice such a thing. It's written in the Shulchan Aruch as practice. Okay. Chas v'shalom, it should be if you learn Oire Chaim, Yeire Deah, Even Ezer, together with a rabbi and a mashpia, by the time you get to that siman, you're going to know that it's Torah, but it's not something that I implement. Chas v'shalom, there's Chas v'shalom to even think about implementing it might be b'poil. Then the Rebbe said, in loy dai bekach, shepratim adinim anal him be'echol asimanim achroinim shebechilek achroinim shulchan aruch. Not only is it all at the end, hoy sebezeh gam hashmatas hatzensor shal hakeser. The censor took it out. I didn't figure out which printing it was taken out of. I looked at a few printings in Russia and it had it in. We need to find which printing. Unfortunately, I didn't have the ability to find it yet. So who, the censor, the censor thought he's taking it out because I can't have this type of situation here where government, remember? These alarm bells go off where Jews are starting to knock people off and deciding who lives and who dies, and that type of thing they're allergic to that. There's a whole other reason why this was taken out by the censor. Golus is getting so dark and difficult. It's possible to use it not only as an Indian in learning Torah, which is just Torah, but benegei l'kiyum advarim b'floil mamish. Umebli lischasha bekach sha'adayin lo yotzu yidei chavas limud chilek erechaim yedei v'evenezer. People are going to start going and implementing this, and they're not going to treat the siman the right way. L'chein sivu momayla she'ovay goy she'ein ba'al b'chira v'yash mit chilek me'atoyra rachman al-Islan kedei shelo yiu ke'ele she'yitu li'isnai v'hetzam l'kach v'yachas li'yehudi acher b'floil mamish. This is what the Rebbe said about this siman in Choshe Mishpat. So I've been thinking, I don't think it's crazy to apply a similar thing to the siman about Avas Yisrael. In other words, you can have the same thing where people say, oh, it's a din Shulchan Aruch of sinna, of hate. And so first of all, there's misapplying it. No, I'm misapplying it. Second of all, darf verstehen, Punkt, was das meint, how to have hate. Befragt that there's Safa and Tanya, that we'll have a minute, we'll come to. And so therefore, maybe, you could apply that to this. I don't know, maybe. Maybe yeah, maybe no, but it's a possibility. It's a possibility. Okay. So Poyol, the hate made it in Choshe Mishpat though. Okay, fine. The Rebbe will conclude with two things. Number one, in Tanya, in Perek Lamed Beis, the Alter Rebbe talks about hate. And the Alter Rebbe says that Taka is the Indian in hate. There's actually a funny joke or anecdote. That a Lubavitcher boy learned Perek Lamed Beis in Tanya. They asked when he came home, what did you learn today? So he said, I learned that you have to hate a Yid. It's a very deep thought. What does that mean? He was so raised with the Avos Yisrael that he knew already. The first half of Lamed Beis he knew. The second half of Lamed Beis, the Alter Rebbe discusses that, by the way, there's sometimes that hate is in. He didn't know. So he said, what did I learn from Perek Lamed Beis? I learned it from Dar Fein Tov and Arosha. What happens here? The Alter Rebbe says, you're right, there is a din of hating a Rasha, and I accept it. He says in Perek Lamed Beis time. However, he issues two major qualifications to this din, both of which are not present in Shulchan Aruch. Both of which are not, at least begoloi, not present in Shulchan Aruch. Qualification number one, he says it needs to be someone who's on your level of a Talmud Chacham, basically. Has to be someone who's your level, she'itcha b'Torah mitzvahs. And you gave the person toichacha, okay, that's not new, and the person didn't. But if it's a person who's not, he's not a level of your Talmud Chacham or whatever, so then the hate doesn't apply to such people. This is the first thing. It's a very limited scope in terms of what type of people. In other words, it has to be someone who's from within your chabura, so to speak. He's from within your clique, within your spiritual clique, and the person did an aveira, and you gave him teichacha. Someone who's outside your sphere, your clique, your madrega, whatever, your hate's what's it going to help? It's not going to help, nothing, no hate. Qualification number one. Qualification number two is he says that when there's a mitzvah of hating, it doesn't negate Avos Yisrael. Doesn't negate Avos Yisrael. It doesn't negate Avos Yisrael. What do you mean? When we learned the Magen Avraham, what's his say though? How does he say? He says, there's a mitzvah of Avos Yisrael chol echad v'echad. However, you should know that a Rasha, not. right? That's how it sounds. In other words, Avos Yisrael does not apply Deyachas, only Deyachas Torah mitzvahs. It does not apply to Rasha. No. V'achta kamaycha applies. There's just a new din. There's a new din. What's the new din? Hate. And there is where he says that. He says that you do both. Avo mitzad toiv sheben and the sin of mitzad rasha sheben. And yet there's this conflicting feelings that you have at the same time. But what's the nekuda? What does Alter Rebbe walk with? Avas Yisrael is l'chol. What did he say in the first beginning? L'chol echad mi Yisrael mi gadol v'ad katan. Everyone, and that doesn't change even to the posheya. What's it? For the posheya, who number one is in your spiritual clique, then in addition to the love, you also have hate. Okay, so that's not what the Alter Rebbe has in Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim. Excuse me, in Chesha Mishpat, which we always had. It's not what the Alter Rebbe has in Shulchan Aruch in this Orach Chaim that was just in this Gala. It's not in the Magen Avram. Fine. So the Rebbe has a sikha, and where the Rebbe discusses this a little in Likutei Sichos. And the Rebbe basically says that if you look, the Gemara clearly says that when we're executing someone, Barar Eloi Misa Yafa. Why? Which is why the way Misa's Bezdin work, it's done in a way it's supposed to cause him pain. What do you see from there? The Rebbe is not bringing this on his own. The Rebbe is quoting this from earlier poskim who already quoted this. Who are they? Maharam Shik and Yeruchim Fishel Perla. They say, so how could you say it doesn't apply to Harasha? The guy who's being executed because of his tremendous riches, so from here is a good raya, l'chayra, that Avos Yisrael never goes away. And that's what's motivating the Alter Rebbe. Avos Yisrael never goes away. Avos Yisrael is always there. No, but then sometimes you add a new element of sinner, but not the way the Magen Avram was saying it, where it sounds like you're going away from it. This is the raya. Then the Alter Rebbe wants that, and he brings some sources that when they talk, so he brings the Rambam. When the Rambam talks about Avos Yisrael in Hilchos Deis, he says Avos Yisrael all Yidden, period. He doesn't say any exceptions. Later in Mishnah Torah, in another place, way later, in Hilchos Reitzeach, he says that for a Rasha there's a din of sinah. So what does that sound like? It also sounds like it's not no Ava and sinah. No, Ava, I told you then, you need to have it. Okay, there's something else that you need to know, you need to have it, so I'll tell you that later, right? So and the Rebbe says, it's not like the Magen Avram. It's not like the Magen Avram. By the Magen Avram, he's like, there's a din of Avos Yisrael, but for a Rasha, not. So it sounds like no Avos Yisrael for the Rasha. But the Rambam, Hilchos Deis, Avos Yisrael, every Yid, then later he tells you there's a din of sinas Hashem, so that sounds more like this Alter Rebbe, where the Alter Rebbe is saying that the Ava, it remains, is always there, and the sin has to be on top, and you have to have both emotions at the same time. Then, in this Sikh, the Rebbe goes a step further, and it's not 100% clear, and you'll look at the source, you'll decide, but the Rebbe seems to be saying that you really could see the same thing in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim. Why? Because the Rebbe is working with the censored version. And what do you have in the censored version? In Kuf Nuvav, doesn't say anything about hate. It only says love. Hate, you have in Choshen Mishpat, that keta. The Rebbe seems to be saying, it's not 100% clear, the Rebbe seems to be saying, that's not the Rebbe Shitta in Tanya. Ava remains, you have Ava, full package, and then sometimes you have to be Moshe Sinah. So different from the Magen Avram, who says, Avos Yisrael, but for some people, no Avos Yisrael. Okay, so the Rebbe is medayik from the fact that this is not there in Orach Chaim. Okay, so now we have this manuscript, and we see in this manuscript that it was there in Orach Chaim. Doesn't change anything. Tanya still is the Tanya. Doesn't change anything. But what it does is it does open the discussion about that diuk, whether that diuk in Orach Chaim is still on the table. So there were other instances, I don't remember right now, there were other instances in where the Rebbe made these types of interpretations, and then later a manuscript or something was in Scala. Usually the Rebbe would say to add on it, La'achar, that was a Scala, this and this, but like leave the original thing as it is. The Sikha of Tafshin Yudei, where censorship itself is sometimes has meaning al pitoyra, so to speak. So this is still something for the scholars and the mashpiyim to work out and figure out exactly how to apply and how this what's going to be here. But Paul, I saw today cost released in electronic form, and it's going to a new Kuf Nun Hey and Kuf Nun Vav with all the additions. They put the additions in, but they did it in brackets.
And what about the differences between the
So there, maybe I didn't look so well, but maybe in the footnotes they went through the minor differences, which are matters of the pen. But they did not say that the first two, the Asherah and the hate in the heart, they didn't realize that it's censorship because they didn't want to realize, but it is censorship, trust me. And so they only wrote it about the other parts. They wrote that Plato's whatever, but that's not right.
just didn't write censorship.
Yeah. They said there's three changes. Some are Plato's some are censorship, and some are another category. There is no other category. Okay, so what's the Hira? The Hira is that not like the boy who came home from Cheder who learned that he has to hate. But we have to be better at the Avos Yisrael and Megadol V'at Katan. And if Chas v'Shalom, we Chas v'Shalom can misconstrue, says the Rebbe says that Torah will take a hit. Torah will take a hit in its integrity. The Chas v'Shalom, we shouldn't misapply it to lead to the Hepech of Avos Yisrael. All right.